Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Music Teacher Mastermind Podcast, a space where independent music teachers find focused challenges, fresh opportunities, practical answers to common problems, and that all-important spark of inspiration. I am Jaclyn Mrozek, though you can call me Jackie, and one of my favorite mindset tools is the COPE acronym, which stands for Challenge, Opportunity, Problem, and Inspiration. And in my masterminds, I like to kick off each meeting by having everyone share their current mindset in one word. And if you have yet to try this, I challenge you to do so because it is difficult. It is not an easy thing to do. And I had to really think about mine this week. And I would say right now, my word is declutter. And I'm not talking about tidying up my Tupperware cabinet, which, by the way, could use some TLC, but I mean decluttering my mind and my studio. And as life gets busier, sometimes we all need to take a step back and clear the clutter to refocus on what truly matters. And last week, my word was redirection. And I believe that a decluttered mindset really paves the way for effective redirection. Now, I would love to hear from you. What is your COPE this week? What is that one word that best captures your mindset as we head into the new week? Think about it and let me know. Also, another focus in my studio right now is the big R word that we all know and sometimes both fear and adore, and that is recital time. Thankfully, we have supportive teachers like Janna Williamson to guide us through this incredibly exciting challenge. And it's Janna Williamson, who is a nationally certified teacher of music, maintains an independent studio in West Chicago, Illinois. She previously taught at the Wheaton Yamaha Music School from 2001 to 2020, where she also served as supervisor of private lessons. Now she coaches teachers worldwide through her YouTube channel, online courses, and individual teacher consultation service. Her YouTube channel features free pedagogical content with a particular focus on how to teach intermediate historical repertoire. Janna holds master's and bachelor's degrees in piano performance from the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt University and the Wheaton College Conservatory of Music. She currently serves as president of the West Suburban Music Teachers Association, and Janna and her husband stay active caring for their 4 children and their 1903 American four-square home. Janna has some really solid advice and answers to questions about this topic, and I think you all will really enjoy it. So with that, let's get started. Hello, teachers, and welcome to the Music Teacher Mastermind Podcast. You can call me Jackie, and today I have with me Janna Williamson, who is known for her popular YouTube channel and how to teach videos. And Janna is an expert at preparing confident performers and helping teachers gear up for spring recitals. So I had to have you on the show today. Welcome, Janna. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Can you share just a bit about yourself and your studio?
Yeah, I teach at my home studio. You can see a little bit of the wood behind me if you're looking at the video. We have a 1903 house, so it's really old and pretty, but it's just in my living room. And I have right now, I think it's 22 pre-college students and then 1 adult. I prefer kids and teens. I don't specialize in adults. But with my children and teens, I teach all levels from absolute beginners all the way up to early advanced. I have one who's auditioning for college piano major right now. So I've got the full gamut.
Oh, that's a busy time. And you have been really busy this winter. I feel like every time I log on to social media, I see that you've been presenting somewhere new.
It's been really fun. I love connecting with teachers all over the country and the world. And a lot of groups have decided, particularly around where I live in Chicago or the northern part of the states, they've decided that doing a winter meeting for their Music Teachers Association online makes a lot of sense because you can do it from the comfort of your own home without worrying about inclement weather. So I presented to a group in Pennsylvania and Minnesota in January, and they said, oh yeah, we always do our January meetings online so we can avoid snow and ice. So that's fun.
Wow. Do they have a pretty good turnout for that?
Yeah, those groups were really well run because they've done this every year. So the president or whoever's moderating the group knows how to run an effective online meeting. And I found it very fulfilling.
Interesting. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and jump into it, especially because this past week, that's what we've been doing in my studio. We've been selecting recital pieces. And so I would like to know, as we get started, how you like to go about choosing recital pieces in your studio.
I think it's a great question. I think younger teachers have in their minds sometimes the recital is this big, important, mammoth thing that has to happen, when really I would advocate for students playing quality repertoire throughout the year and performing a lot throughout the year. And really, as pianists, we have no excuse for our students playing bad music because we have so much music available to us. You know, the current popular methods have excellent music in them. We have so much supplementary repertoire. We have so much historical repertoire available from late elementary all the way up to advanced. There's just so much repertoire. So my philosophy with picking pieces for recitals or any performance is that my students should just be playing good music throughout the whole year, that they should have good quality methods or historical collections or supplementary music, whatever it is, good books that they're always using. And then we keep a record throughout the year of all the pieces they've learned and passed, whether or not they actually memorize them or polish them all the way to performance. And then when I get close to recital season, I just ask them to show me their favorite pieces, and we talk about which ones might be good for a recital in particular. And I let them pick the first one for sure. And then I kind of guide them after that. We usually do 2 pieces on a recital. So I'll help them find a contrasting piece. Or if we have enough time at that point, then I might say, hey, to go along with that, it might be nice to do something like this. And then we'll choose another piece according to that. For my intermediate and advanced students, they're going to be playing at least one historical piece, like a sonatina or something by Chopin or something on the recital. And then they might have one selection that's more of a free choice, like something that's jazzy or a more, supplementary item or something like that. But that's how I usually approach it. And I don't love the mindset of I have to pick a special piece just for the recital, partly because I think one of the main pitfalls there is that teachers can then give their student a piece that is too difficult for them to play. And it puts this pressure on the recital piece when really students should be playing, as I said, good music, and they should be playing well throughout the year. There's a great Frances Clark quote in her book, Questions and Answers, where she says that you shouldn't expect your students to play any differently in a recital than they do week to week. And so teaching throughout the year, we should be having them play beautifully and artistically, albeit on the recital, they should feel very confident and polished, perhaps to a level that they're not always achieving with every piece in a lesson, but they should still be playing well throughout the year.
Yeah, I love the idea of keeping a record of all the pieces that they've learned and selecting one from that, because we do have the mindset here. I mean, sometimes, as a student is playing a piece in the fall or whatnot, I'll say to them, this would be a great piece for your spring recital, and we will do that. But that's not the norm. For us, usually about mid to late February, we're looking at new pieces, usually in books that we're already working out of. I do like to work out of those kinds of books, but I've never considered going back and looking at what they've done, because that is their own personal collection. And there's great music that you work on all throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like that.
For younger students or less experienced students, they're not going to want to go back several months because those pieces will feel very easy to them if they've progressed a lot, in the earliest years of study. But for older students, once you're at mid-intermediate level, there's not so much progression throughout a 9-month school year that they're going to feel that those pieces from the fall are much easier than what they're working on in February, right? And also, very intricate pieces benefit from a little bit of a break. So if they learned something difficult in the fall, and then they took a couple of months off around the holiday time, and you ask them, hey, would you review that piece? They might come back and find that it actually feels really good once they come back to it. Like it feels seasoned and matured. I do that with Baroque music a lot. I'll have my students learn a Baroque piece that they might use on an exam in the spring, in the fall, so they can then let it kind of sit in the background for a while, not work on it, and bring it back out, and it will feel more secure.
That's a great idea. I am thinking about some of my students with Baroque, and I wish they would love it a little bit more. How do you get students to love Baroque? I love playing Baroque music.
Well, we have to remember it is culturally the farthest away from us. Nobody is doing French court dance, minuets, and sarabands. Nobody's doing that in 2025. So it really feels weird and unfamiliar. So it's okay for them to not naturally love it. A lot of it is just getting them to listen to it. And then I think we just have to be those crazy ambassadors for different styles of music. I just tell my students all the time, I just love Bach. I love it. And I heard one presenter talk about teaching Bach where she said she pictures when she's practicing Bach, she pictures him sitting next to the bench and just saying, did you see what I did there? Wasn't that amazing? Were you expecting that? Look at that. Isn't that great? And there is something to be said for just finding what's amazing in it. But I also think students frequently approach Baroque music like a finger exercise, not actually playing it expressively. We have a lot, we don't need to go into performance practice, but there's a lot of issues around performance practice with Baroque music. And I would advocate for students feeling like they can play it expressively, play it beautifully, have some musical choice around things like articulation and dynamics so that they can connect with it a little bit more and not just play it like, a whole string of 16th notes with no expressive qualities whatsoever.
Yeah, I have yet to have somebody really genuinely agree with me, but we'll get there. It's a new goal. All right. Okay. So just referencing back, I think that's really good about what you said about, especially newer teachers, how the spring recital is like this big event and they put a lot of pressure on it. And I've been there, I've done that. And it has affected my recitals because there's so much pressure on the student, like that this is such a big deal. And one thing that took me a long time to understand is that it is okay to choose rep that's at their current level. For some reason, I always thought, oh, we've got to take it a step up. Like now it's time to impress. But since I switched that up, we haven't really had too much of a problem since. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I also appreciate that you mentioned them playing pieces out of their method book, because I think that was another thing that I avoided. But there's some great music in some of these method books.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reason that the Faber's Piano Adventures method is so popular worldwide, I mean, who knows how many millions of books they have sold, is because the music is really great. So yes, my recital programs frequently have something by the Fabers, something from Piano Safari. The rote pieces in the Piano Safari level 1 are great recital pieces because they sound so much better than any reading piece a level 1 student would encounter. All the Alfred Premier books have great, lots of jazzy pieces in those. I think the only real danger with programming method book pieces, or relying on that, I should say, is that if you have many students in the same level, you don't want kids playing the same piece on a recital. So you do have to plan ahead a little bit if you have 3 8-year-old boys who want to play Monsters on the Run, right? So there tend to be those favorites, and you just want to make sure that you've planned ahead a bit so that they can find the piece that they really like. But absolutely, I would say my elementary level students are probably going to play one method book piece and maybe one other thing. Or even my very, very beginners, they're probably going to just play 2 method book pieces because it's very hard to supplement at those earliest stages of study anyway.
Well, I think it takes a lot of pressure off the teacher for finding music, because if you have a really large studio and you're wanting to provide all this wowing music going to your method, it alleviates a lot of pressure. But let's talk about teachers that maybe don't have a big supplemental library, right? Maybe they want to venture out, but it is overwhelming. We have so much great music available to us. It can be one of those like decision fatigue moments. So where do I start? So do you have any recommendations in that area?
I would say you don't have to do it all. I certainly don't. I have a huge library at home. Much of it is historical music. I have just a lot of editions of historical music. I would say just find, 2 or 3 composers that you really like and buy a few levels of their things and start using them with your students. Again, not with the pressure of I have to use this for the recital, but just use it as repertoire throughout the year. If you remember stuff you played, all the Alfred big composers like Robert Vandal and Catherine Rollin were writing when I was a student. And so if there's anything that you remember loving, absolutely, there's no harm in some of the 80s and 90s. Great supplemental, Martha Meir. There's so many great things from Alfred. Another way to keep up on this is to go to conferences or composer or publisher showcases online, or anytime you can just go to something where they're introducing new books. You get to spend half an hour or so actually listening to someone talk about what the publications are, play some examples, get to know that book. It just forces you to slow down and think about those things as opposed to just picking up a book and looking for 5 minutes and then putting it back on the shelf. But find the composers that you like, figure out what kinds of things they write. Vandal writes very, very patterned, very rhythmic things. So it works really well for the kids who like that. I think of Catherine Rollin as writing more things. She writes a lot of patterned rhythmic things too, but she also writes a lot of beautiful lyrical things. And then as you start to get to know your students, pay attention to what they groove on, what they practice extra, what they really enjoy playing, and then just start to think about what collections or pieces of sheet music might match up with their personality and their affinities the best. I have a local colleague who uses the phrase, be a student of your student. So really just paying attention to their personality, what things they're into, and then what kind of music they really are drawn towards. And that can help you think about the supplemental repertoire, but you do not have to know it all. I don't know it all. I can't keep up with all the new stuff. I just really like finding pieces that suit a student very well, because, something that becomes their piece because it's just the right thing for them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Actually, a few weeks ago, I was looking for music for a student and I have a bin. They're organized by level. And I was just going through and I pulled out, it was like a level 6 Alfred Basic performance book or something like that. And I said, hey, this was my book when I was in 6th grade, or 8th grade. And she's in the 8th grade. And she's like, oh, let me see it. And I was going through, I'm like, there are some great pieces in here. And so much so that I wouldn't let her have my book. I made her buy her own. I was like, I'm going to start playing out of this book again. So here I am playing music I play in the 8th grade, and I have no shame. I've been having so much fun with it. So let's go ahead and start talking about, well, I was going to ask you about starting a new piece, but I feel like we already covered that because you use a lot of pieces that they've already been working on. But you did mention that sometimes you do give them a new piece to go into a new direction. So about how long before a recital do you recommend picking that out?
Yes, I get asked this question a lot, so I actually do have an answer for you, but it's not specifically to recital prep. It would just be more, how long does it take a student to learn something? So a little formula just based on all my years of teaching, and this would be for students who practice, right? This is in an ideal world, students who go home and follow your instructions. For elementary students, it should only take them about 2 to 4 weeks to learn a piece. For early intermediate, 4 to 6, mid intermediate, 6 to 8. You can kind of see my formula here. Late intermediate, 8 to 10. And then this kind of all works backward. If you think about doing a college degree, many college semesters are about 14 semesters. So if you were preparing a jury in that time, that's about 12 weeks to learn your repertoire and performance. So that's kind of the spectrum for learning. Now, that said, if you're going to do a formal performance of any kind, like a recital, you do need to add about 3 or 4 weeks for polishing it and getting it up to the standpoint. So that means for a mid-intermediate student, let's just say if it takes them 6 weeks to learn a piece, including getting it up to tempo, playing all the dynamics, doing really great articulation, having a sense for what the character of the piece is about and being able to play it from start to finish well, then if they're going to memorize it, or even if they're not going to memorize, just have it be very, very reliable under pressure, you're looking at more like 9 or 10 weeks. And by 9 or 10 weeks, I mean 9 or 10 weeks of lessons and practice. So if there's a spring break or a Christmas break or something in there, then you'd want to factor that in. Now, that said, if I'm working with an intermediate student and I'm thinking back that far, I might not hear that piece every week in a lesson, right? It might be that 3 of those weeks for marinating and polishing, they're still just working on that on their own. Or it might even get a break for a week and we're coming back a week later. So it doesn't need to be like you spend 15 minutes of every week for 9 weeks in a row on this recital piece. And I like to structure my lessons where a student always has something that's more of a review and something that's newer. I don't want them just playing, again, 2 recital pieces for an entire semester. That's not, in my mind, that's not good teaching. That's not a musical experience. That's like learning how to just press keys down on the instrument. So I want them making music at a variety of levels with a variety of experiences all the time. And then, of course, the couple of weeks before the recital are going to be a little bit more focused on getting those pieces up to snuff.
Oh, I love this. I love that. Okay, let's talk about it's quality weeks, right? I mean, you have the quantity, but they need to be quality weeks as well. Because I was telling that to a student the other day. She was like, we have so much time. And I'm like, actually, we have 2 weeks off for spring break. one of us will probably get the flu between now and the spring recital, and you might have an off practice week. I have to take those into account.
Even the most consistent practicers have off weeks, right? Either they're sick or they go on a weekend trip or they have a big school project or something. Everyone has that happen. So by allowing enough time, thinking back, or by using review pieces, you're just preventing that last minute issue of not being ready. I also do performance class for my students 2 weeks before the recital. So really their deadline is 2 weeks earlier because children and teenagers do not understand time management. I don't care how organized and mature they are, they still just don't have the same perspective that adults do. And so unless you're regularly saying to them, 5 more weeks until the recital, 4 more weeks until the recital, they don't have that in their mind. So by setting a pre-performance deadline for my kids 2 weeks before the recital, that really kicks them into gear to be ready to play in a casual environment. And then they have 2 weeks to work out whatever they figured out didn't work well in the casual performance before they go do the more formal one. And that just goes back to my message to teachers to get your students performing throughout the year. Just keeping in mind, performance does not have to be a formal recital. It can be as simple as practicing performing the piece in your lesson. So like they move away from the piano, they sit down somewhere else for a second, they come over, they sit down at the piano, they perform, and then they stand up and bow and you clap for them. So that would be like the most informal version of a performance, but you can go anywhere on a spectrum between that and a formal recital, such as playing for the student who comes after them. Can you stay 5 minutes later and you'll play your piece and Susie will play her piece for you? You can assign them to play for their parents at home. You can make a recording, a video, and ask them to send it off to grandma who lives far away. Whatever it is, there's lots of opportunities for performing. And if I can just tell you a quick story, my students all just did a retirement home performance that was all duets. It was our duet recital. We have a retirement home here where a retired piano professor lives. And so he raised money to get a really nice Steinway in their auditorium. So they let us use it, which is lovely. And there's built-in audience, very enthusiastic residents who live there who love coming to hear kids play piano. So we were just there a few weeks ago and he actually came, which I was surprised that he was there that night, but I know him personally. And he came up to me afterward and he said, Janna, this was so fun. And I think he was talking about the fact that it was all duets. It was a more fun recital than maybe a typical solo recital, just because kids are playing together, a little more well-known rep arrangements and such. Anyway, he said, this was so fun. When I was a kid, I used to pray on the way to the recital that my family would crash the car so I wouldn't have to play in the recital. And he said, and the reason was I was so nervous because the only performing I ever did was at that recital at the end of the year. And if I'd had things like this that weren't as high pressure and that were fun, I would have felt so much more comfortable playing in that end of year recital. So I was like, well, I'm just going to use that story from now on because this is what I'm always saying to people. But this is someone who had a performing career for decades and is looking back at his childhood and saying how that could have been so much more comfortable if he just had more experience.
Oh, that's a powerful story.
It is. I'll just add, it takes a lot of work for the teacher to plan a lot of performances. That's a lot of work on us, even if it's just as simple as saying, can you stay 2 minutes late to play for the next kid? That is something that you have to work on. But I think it's totally worth it. I think it really benefits our students. It takes the pressure off of them when they do get to those formal moments of being under pressure. And there's also just a lot of wisdom in the idea of practicing performing, that is the best way to feel like you know how to do it. There's a quote from the violinist Midori that says something along the lines of, try to bring the stage to the practice room. So a lot of performers will think, well, if I can just feel as comfortable on stage as I did when I was practicing at home, then it'll all be fine. But the truth is you're never going to feel as comfortable on stage as you do at home. Your stress response is activated. You feel nervous on some sort of spectrum. So instead, by practicing performing at home, in your teacher's studio, in low-key casual environments, you're learning to bring the stage and have that experience of what it will feel like when you actually do perform. And then you can learn how to manage those feelings and not pray that your family will crash their car on the way to your recital.
Sure. I've noticed that because I'm not the church pianist at my church, but I do fill in. And the few times that I would fill in, I would feel so much pressure, especially because everybody knows I'm a piano teacher. And so they seem to think that I'm playing piano all the time, which is the complete opposite, right? I'm just sitting next to it and then I'm too exhausted to play when I want to. But that's another conversation. But when I would go, I would be incredibly nervous. And then I remember for whatever reason, I had to play a few weeks in a row. And by the time we got to like the fourth or fifth week, I didn't think anything of it. It was no big deal because it became more routine for me.
I've had exactly that experience. My last semester of graduate school, I had something like 7 recitals in 5 or 6 weeks. It was my own recital plus a composition recital plus all these collaborative, violin and viola, whatever. And I just remember by the end barely getting nervous because I was like, well, here I am again on the stage. Yeah. There wasn't time to get nervous. That was part of it. But also I had just been doing so much of it. It was completely normalized as opposed to one individual event having so much pressure on it that you feel all those feelings so much more heightened in that moment.
Yeah. For sure. Okay. I do want to kind of rewind back because this is more of a question that I've been really excited to ask you. And it's introducing a performance piece. Like you sit the student down and I know teachers do it different ways, but you're starting a piece. How do you like to introduce it? I would love to know.
That's such a great question. I think in the first lesson, you have to have a combination of getting the student to have an idea for the whole piece, the whole character. What is this piece about? Having that kind of overview of what it sounds like and what it's expressing. And then also sending them home with some very individual practical things. Because I've been teaching a very long time, most of the repertoire, most of the intermediate repertoire, I have taught multiple times. So I know what the typical pitfalls are going to be in any particular piece. It's just these 2 measures are really nasty and hard to play, or the left hand is very difficult technically, or whatever is going to be an issue in this. So I like to give them some sort of inspiration for what is this piece all about? The grand scheme. What would you like about this piece? What did you notice about this piece when I played it for you or we listened to a recording? And then also let's look at the form. Let's find the sections. How are you going to practice this? And send them home with specific practice suggestions as well as some technical instruction, because I do feel like the 2 things that go most wrong in pieces, I'm not talking about the elementary level when we're starting kids off, a little bit more advanced, like late elementary through intermediate. The 2 things that can typically go wrong that are very difficult to rehabilitate are rhythm and technique. So if you can prevent a few technical problems on the front end by giving them good fingering or telling them what kind of technical approach they should use, and if you can make sure they go home with counting or understanding of any rhythmic difficulties, if there's any syncopation or any difficult coordination between the 2 hands or anything that's, going to be a problem rhythm, then you're just going to feel much better as they come back week to week and they haven't practiced those 2 things wrong. We still end up after weeks fixing technical issues that come up. That's always going to happen. But I think those are the 2 things that I like to prevent as much as possible. It's actually much easier to correct an incorrect pitch than it is an incorrect rhythm, in my experience. So
no, you're right. Okay, let's talk about memorizing. I feel like this can be a hot topic. It doesn't have to be, but it is. And I've had very strong feelings on all sides throughout my teaching career. But what are your thoughts? What are your tips? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So memorization for so long was this culturally mandated thing for pianists, for solo playing, not for collaborative. And I am very grateful that the culture has moved a little bit away from that, because I don't think it's a hill that we need to die on ever. I don't know that it always is required for a good performance, right? That said, I do have my students memorize all of their performance pieces. If they cannot reliably play from memory, I will allow them to use the score on a recital. But I would say that 95% of the time, my students are performing from memory, because for amateur students, whether it's amateur adults or pre-college students, they don't truly know the piece until they have done that work to actually analyze it. That's my personal experience. Plus, memorizing actually allows you to be free from looking at the score, which means you're more likely to be able to listen better and feel better, solve technical problems. So it just takes you away from the mode of reading into actually making music and understanding it. So that's why. There's also one very basic benefit to memorizing, which is that if your student always has a piece that's memorized that they can play, anytime they go somewhere and someone says, hey, you play the piano, can you play something for us? They have something ready at their fingertips to be able to play. So there are a lot of benefits for doing it. It is not the hill I want to die on. The last thing I'll just say about it is that we still live in a culture where memorization is required for most evaluative events, such as festivals and exams, and certainly, college level auditions. So if you don't teach your students to memorize at a younger age or an earlier level, and then they want to do those things later, it's so much harder to learn how to do that later. So I do think it's just part of our curriculum. We should just be teaching our students how to play without looking at the score and incorporating all kinds of memory experiences or playing away from the score experiences, again, throughout our educational curriculum, so that it just doesn't become this thing of I can only play music when I have a book up on the rack. Because the book itself is not music. Lines and dots on a page are not music. The aural sound in real time, that's music. And so I just want to make sure that teachers and my students understand that. That's why I'm so happy that rote repertoire has become more popular, that beginners are allowed to play without just staring at the book, because it's a more musical experience anyway for them to be free to play fun music all over the keyboard and focus on their technique without being asked always to stare at the book.
Yeah. I love rote. I love rote so much. So for me, memorizing was not a positive experience. And I think when you said analyzing, when the students are analyzing the piece, they understand the patterns and they see it, then they're given the tools and then it makes sense. Yes. The memorization makes sense. For me, it was more of the mindset of muscle memory.
Yep.
So, if I tripped up, I had to go all the way back to the beginning.
Can I just say, everyone has had that experience. Everyone has had an experience of a memory slip. And even the best professionals that I know, my graduate school teacher, Winston Choi, who is a monster performer and plays all this rep from all different styles and periods. I've heard him perform so many times, and he has stories of memory slips, including one on the live Chicago classical radio station. So everyone struggles with this. And the more we can make our students understand that just like feeling nervous is normal, messing up is also normal. And then absolutely give them tools. And you mentioned analysis and patterns and, chords and scales and all those kinds of things. I teach a ton of theory. I very much teach my students how to approach the piano from a theoretical standpoint. I don't actually love theory for theory's sake. And I have a couple of friends who totally are theory nerds and love it. I don't love it, but I use it so much because of what it allows us to do, to be able to understand music and therefore remember it, and also play expressively, knowing your theory, understanding when things are the same and when they're different and what's a really unique and special chord. That allows you to play more expressively, not just remember it. So theory is that thing that integrates all parts of what we do. We play our scales for technical practice, but we also play our scales so we understand our key signatures and what notes are in the scale. And it's something that should just be integrated, I feel like, throughout everything that we do, partly for memorization's sake.
Right. And then if you do have memory slip and you mess up, you kind of can shift gears a little bit more quickly, and save yourself, or maybe just, go ahead and land on that tonic and just call it a day.
Oh, I've done that.
Last thing I want to talk about is performance anxiety, which we talked about a little bit, but and I think you've covered a few things, lots of performance opportunities, right? Knowing your piece to where if you have to shift gears, you can, so you have that confidence. Was there anything else that you would say to performance anxiety for your students?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I'll keep myself brief as much as I can. There are, like you said, two types of performance anxiety. You can feel anxious either because you don't know your piece, which is its own thing, And even if you really know your music, anytime you're under pressure, whether it's playing the piano or public speaking or whatever it is, we have a natural bodily response. It's called the stress response. And it's the part of our brain stem that sends out the hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. It's the response, the fight, flight, or freeze. You hear people talk about it that way, that anytime we have something that we feel under pressure or we feel like we're in danger, it's put inside our bodies to protect us. So in prehistoric times, you might have been chased by a predator and you would need that adrenaline to give you that extra speed to be able to get out of harm's way. Now, what we have to remind our students is that performing at the piano is not a dangerous activity, but the exact same bodily response is triggered. And so your hormones can tell you that. So everyone has that happen and everyone feels something, whether it's physical or mental, everyone feels something on a spectrum. Some people feel very, very little, like their hands just get sweaty or they get just a little bit of the butterflies in their stomach. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, some people have this debilitating, like they can't even walk on the stage. And there's plenty of professionals who have dealt with that debilitating level of performance anxiety. And so I think is the most important thing for teachers is to acknowledge that this is a normal thing. Just the stress response is not even always bad. For some students, that adrenaline actually just increases their focus. I have one of my own children for whom that was always the case. I would hear him practicing and it'd be fine. And then he would go play in a recital and it just had that extra oomph. It was just so much more exciting because for him, he was a very laid back personality. He is still with us. He's a very laid back personality. And just the adrenaline running through his body gave him that extra focus and that it just kind of elevated everything in a very positive way. So the term performance anxiety is actually a little bit difficult because it puts it in a negative light. But I think it's better framed as this is the normal bodily response, the stress response that occurs. And then we have to learn how to deal with it. So that's why frequently performing is so helpful because it teaches you what your body does under pressure. Are you the kind that gets the sweaty palms? Or do you feel the butterflies in your stomach? Or does your heart beat really, really fast? Is your breathing really shallow? Do you have trouble with negative scripts running through your head, like telling you negative things, like you're now good at this? All of those things are normal things that lots of people experience. And so then we have to do the work to figure out what can we do to not try to get rid of it, because you're probably never going to be able to get rid of it, but to accept it and play anyway. And then, ultimately, how can you use it for your benefit?
I've heard too that it's the same chemicals going on as when we're really excited about something.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I told this to my son. He used to play select baseball and he was always the leadoff hitter. He was very, very good in practice. He always was hitting the ball over the fence. Every time we'd have a game, he would strike out every time because he would get that anxiety. And so finally I told him, I was like, you know what, just go up there and be like, I am so excited to do this. And anyway, he ended up striking out at that game. And he was like, Mom, the whole time I kept being like, I'm excited. That's okay. I missed the ball. I'm excited. Like he was trying to shift that. So that didn't work for him. But it's one of those things where I try to tell my students, I'm like, look, you're going to get to share this. You've prepared this. But I find that really interesting.
I would just say, particularly for younger children, that reframe is really helpful just to explain that this is their body, and even to not use the word anxiety or another negative term like nervous, but to reframe it as this is your body telling you it's excited. And I also like to make sure I tell my students that I know they want to play well, right? And so they feel that natural feeling or pressure of wanting to do a good job. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
They would be really weird if they didn't want to play well and didn't care about how it went. I also think students default to a mindset of performing is just getting from the first note to the last note without making any mistakes. That's not a good mindset because we're humans, we're not machines. And so we are going to make at least one mistake probably every time we perform. It's very, very unusual to feel like you did everything perfectly. So I try to get them out of that mindset by encouraging them to think that when they perform, they are sharing music. All this work they've done to do everything the right way with dynamics and all of that and play at a fast tempo or whatever the piece calls for, they're then curating this experience of this exciting piece or this beautiful piece or whatever that individual thing is. And then they're sharing that with their audience, who again can't experience that unless someone plays it for them. Again, that music is that embodiment in real time. So what a gift that we can give to other people to experience that excitement or that beauty.
That's beautiful. Let's just rephrase it. Like, officially from here on out, it's called performance excitement. Performance excitement.
I'm great with that.
Performance excitement. Yay, we love it. We're so happy. Okay, well, Janna, this is so great. This is so helpful. And especially right now, because I know that for a lot of teachers who maybe don't do a lot in their studio for the year, most of us do the spring recitals. It's very timely and very helpful. And thank you. And so if somebody wants to check out, you've got courses, you've got lots of helps. And if somebody needs help teaching some historical pieces, you've got plenty of videos on that. What are some ways that we can find you?
My YouTube channel, most of the videos over there are, as you said, about historical pieces, mostly intermediate. There's a few late elementary and a few early advanced, but each video is 10 to 15 minutes and it covers one piece. And it's like I was talking about when you asked about introducing pieces. I know all the pitfalls in all the standard repertoire. And I also have ideas for you on how to get your student excited about it and how to help them play very expressively, as well as talk about theory and analysis too. So if you're teaching a standard piece like the Bergmuller Arabesque or something like that, and you're teaching it for the first time, or you had one bad experience teaching it and you want to do a better job this time, just search for my name and the piece you're looking for, and you might find it on there. I think I'm up to like 60 videos. So there's quite a few pieces on there. I have a large course called Preparing Confident Performers that is comprehensive, talking about all the things we talked about today and more, with very, very specific tactics, because we talked about generalizations, but I have lots of practice techniques for memorization, as well as ideas for how to prevent performance anxiety, or as we're now calling it, performance excitement, and really setting up your studio and how you teach to encourage as much as we can that sharing of music, and across the board in your studio, helping your students be confident performers. So all of that, Jackie will link, and my website is just my name, jannawilliamson.com, and you can find everything there. And you can contact me through that if you have any questions.
Yeah. And you're on social media. You're pretty active on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah. If you search, Janna is a very unusual name, Janna. So if you search Janna Williamson, you should find me in all the appropriate places.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm very grateful. And yes, I'll put all those links in the show notes so people can find you. And thank you, Janna. And I look forward to seeing more about you speaking at all these places, because that seems to be a big thing for you right now. So,
well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Music Teacher Mastermind Podcast. And I also want to extend a big thank you to Janna Williamson for helping us with recital prep. Be sure to check the show notes for links to her course and some great articles that expand on this topic. March is just around the corner. Next week, if you're listening in real time, and it brings some incredibly exciting prospects. Not only does it serve as a preview of spring, which I think many of us are eagerly awaiting, but it's also the month when I will be diving into all things conferences. I have picked my 4 favorite events, my 4 favorite conferences, and next week's episode is a must listen if you teach group lessons. If you're teaching them or you're considering them, you've got to check this one out. Marie Lee, co-producer of the online conference Group Illuminated, will be joining me as we discuss group lesson strategies and explore what Group Illuminated has to offer. If you teach any kind of group lesson, or if you have ever been curious about it, you don't want to miss what she has to say. And if you found value in today's episode, please consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help more teachers discover the show and benefit from the insights we share each week. All right, teachers, that's all I have for now. Keep teaching, keep living, and keep practicing. Take care.